I moved to this neighborhood for one simple reason. I wanted peace. After more than 10 years working in the high pressure environment of the FBI, chasing criminals, conducting internal investigations, staying alert 24/7, I believed I deserved a peaceful home. A quiet suburban area, full of greenery, birds singing every morning. That was exactly what I saw when I signed the contract to buy this house. I didn't expect that just a few weeks later, I'd be facing a self proclaimed HOA queen, a network of fake police officers, and a conspiracy that could cost me my entire career. The central figure behind all the chaos, a woman named Karen. Karen lived just a few houses down from me. The day I moved in, she showed up at my door holding a thick stack of papers and introduced herself with exaggerated formality. Welcome to the neighborhood. I run the rules for the Homeowners Association, HOA. Around here, we take our living standards seriously. Her tone wasn't friendly, it was commanding. Her eyes scanned me as if she were judging whether I qualified to live here. I smiled, thanked her, and politely took the paperwork. But in my mind, I was a bit surprised. I had lived in several neighborhoods with legitimate HOAs, but never encountered anyone like Karen. Just a few days later, things began to feel off. A black SUV, no police markings, but outfitted with red and blue flashing lights, would park near my house every evening. I once saw two people in dark blue uniforms patrolling the neighborhood. On the back of their shirts were the words, HOA Police. They went house to house, jotting notes on clipboards. Their eyes were cold, and whenever they saw me, they whispered something to each other. Then, one early morning, I was jolted awake by aggressive pounding at my door. Bang! 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 The knocks were violent, like they were trying to break it down. I jumped up, heart racing. After years in the FBI, I knew exactly what an intimidation knock sounded like. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Outside were two people in uniform, standing close, arms folded. One was a tall man with a cold face. The other was a woman with sharp, narrow eyes. On their shirts, the logo OOO Police, a force I had never heard of. I cracked the door open. "Can I help you?" I asked calmly. The man pointed at me. "We're here to inspect your garage. There have been reports that you've violated multiple regulations." I frowned. "I'm not sure what you're talking about. What's wrong with my garage?" The woman answered immediately. "We have authority under the HOA. Don't make this more difficult." At that moment, I knew. They weren't real officers. They had no warrant, no legal documentation, and more importantly, they had no idea who I was. "I'm an FBI agent," I said slowly, clearly. "If you have a valid search warrant, please present it." The man smirked. "Being FBI doesn't mean you're above this neighborhood's laws." Just then, Karen appeared. She stood behind the two of them with a fake smile. "We're just doing our duty," she said sweetly, but her eyes were like needles. "You don't get special treatment just because you're in the FBI." That was the moment I understood. This was all an act. A power play designed to intimidate me, directed by Karen herself. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Karen, this is my home. If you want to play power games, you've picked the wrong person." My story, a tale of an FBI agent backed into a corner by a fake HOA, began that day. But I'm not the kind of man who folds easily, and Karen was about to learn that, in a way she'd never forget. After that morning when I was threatened at my doorstep, I began to dig deeper. I've always been patient and meticulous. Working for the FBI trained me to observe everything, especially the smallest details. And Karen? She wasn't just a controlling neighbor. She was quietly building a power structure. At first, Karen hand-delivered letters to every household listing the new HOA rules. They included very specific mandates. No parking on the street after 10 p.m. No music after 8 p.m., even inside your own home. Only 3 approved types of plants allowed in front yards. Lawns must be watered at least twice a week, or a warning would be issued. It all sounded like something a typical HOA might do. But there was one problem. I contacted the real HOA board, and they told me the HOA had been dissolved the year before due to lack of funding, which meant Karen was writing her own rules and enforcing them herself. I started paying closer attention to the people in the HOA police uniforms. They had no names on their shirts, no badges, no ID numbers. They went door to door, handing out warning notices. A neighbor named Raymond told me. They knocked at 6 a.m., said I was violating rules because my trash bin was out too long. They threatened to report me to the HOA committee. I've never seen that committee meet in my life. When I asked what he did, he just shook his head. I didn't want trouble. I paid the $50 minor violation fee, and they left. $50 in cash, no receipts, no paper trail, no accountability. More and more, I noticed people were afraid to speak up. Some homes had signs on their lawns reading, "I support the HOA." Others stayed quiet, heads down, following every one of Karen's directives. No one asked questions. No one dared refuse. One afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Smith, an elderly woman who lived at the corner. She leaned in and whispered, "Dear, my daughter wanted to repaint my house, but Karen said that color isn't on the HOA-approved palette. I didn't dare do it. She threatened to fine me if I tried." Her hands were trembling, her eyes filled with fear, and I understood. Karen had successfully instilled terror. In the FBI, I'd seen plenty of fake organizations, but rarely had I witnessed a place where residents were so easily intimidated by one woman, homemade uniforms, and documents with no legal stamp. Karen didn't use violence. She used something far more insidious: manipulation and social fear, a fake system, unchecked, unquestioned. And I knew, if I didn't act, I'd be her next target. A few days later, Karen returned to my house, but this time she didn't bring a citation. She smiled politely and spoke softly. "You know, nobody wants to live in a chaotic neighborhood. I'm just keeping things in order. If you don't want to attract attention, I can help you blend in more easily." An invitation, disguised as a warning. I replied with a cold stare. "I know what you're doing, and I'm not someone who scares easily, Karen." She smiled again and placed a small note on the table outside my porch. "This is a list of HOA recommendations. Read it carefully and think about it." Then she walked away, as if nothing had happened. That was when I realized I was no longer just a watcher. I was officially a target. But I wasn't afraid, because I wasn't just another resident. I was FBI, and I had already started documenting everything: names, times, actions. Karen might have silenced the others, but with me, she was about to face a kind of resistance she'd never seen before. I once thought that if I simply kept my distance, Karen would back off. I was wrong. Just days after Karen's polite visit, my phone began ringing at odd hours: 2 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 p.m. during meetings, always from unknown numbers, and always hung up the moment I picked up. Then one morning, I got a call from none other than my boss at the FBI. His voice was low and tense. "You need to come into the office immediately. There's been a complaint filed against you. Allegations of non-cooperation with local authorities, threatening residents, and defying the HOA organization." It felt like a bucket of cold water was dumped on me. "Where did these accusations come from?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "From your neighborhood. There's documentation with signatures. We need to investigate." When I got to the office, my boss already had a stack of documents on his desk, copies of official reports from the HOA about me, a detailed complaint from the HOA police describing me as uncooperative and obstructing property inspections. Everything was presented to look official, but I knew immediately this was a calculated strike, a well-crafted script. I could only exhale and say, "All of those people are fake. None of them have any authority. They're wearing uniforms bought online, carrying documents printed from a home computer." My boss looked at me, his expression caught between belief and doubt. "I'll escalate this to internal review, but you need to stay quiet and avoid confrontation. We don't need a media mess." I nodded, but inside I was burning with anger. When I returned home, I noticed something had changed. The looks from neighbors who used to wave good morning were different. No more conversations, no more smiles. Doors closed earlier, faster. That afternoon, I found a flyer tucked under my windshield. HOA police recruiting volunteers, meeting at Karen's house, participation fee $100. In bold at the bottom, "We protect this neighborhood. We do not tolerate resistance." I pulled out my phone and took a picture for evidence. That evening, just as I was about to have dinner, there was a frantic knock at the door. It was Tamara, the widowed woman from the end of the street. She was shaking, clutching a paper in her hands. "They gave me this. They said I have to repaint my fence because it violates the approved color code. If I don't, they'll forcibly repaint it." I looked at the paper. It was a violation notice signed by the HOA enforcement unit. No official stamp, no license number. But it looked incredibly real. Tamara's eyes were filled with despair. I called the real HOA. No one answered. Their website, it redirects now. I clenched my fists. This wasn't a game anymore. Karen had hijacked the old HOA's presence, replaced it with something entirely under her control. That night, I received a message from a blocked number. Stop now, or you'll lose more than your house. Simple, direct, cold. I took a screenshot, saved it, sent it to Alvarez, the local officer I'd previously reached out to. Minutes later, he replied, "Got it. But for a formal investigation, we need at least one resident's statement." I'm FBI, but even I, right now, couldn't do a thing. Karen wasn't hiding. She didn't need to. She was challenging me openly, right in front of the entire neighborhood, without fear of consequence. Because she knew, fear keeps people silent. I looked around, porch lights turning off earlier than usual, windows shut, as if the whole neighborhood was watching me, waiting to see me fail. So I began to plan. Karen could manipulate people with a fake HOA, phony citations, and threats, but I had something she didn't: evidence, investigative training, and the truth. I'm with the FBI. But that doesn't mean I can act on my own, especially in a civil matter like this. I needed to follow the law. I needed evidence. And I needed a counterstrike Karen wouldn't see coming. I arranged a meeting with Alvarez, the local police officer I'd contacted earlier. We met at a small cafe about 10 minutes outside the neighborhood, a place free from prying eyes and Karen's hidden cameras. I brought everything with me. The citation, papers bearing the fake HOA logo, but no official seal. Photos of the HOA police SUV with obscured license plates. The anonymous threatening text. The flyer recruiting HOA police volunteers with a $100 fee. And a handwritten statement from Tamara, the only neighbor brave enough to stand with me. Alvarez examined each item in silence. Then he exhaled. Yeah, something's definitely off. This license plate belongs to a private security company, but... He paused. I can't find any official contract between them and the local HOA. If what you say is true and the HOA was dissolved, then this is operating outside the law. I nodded. So can we open an investigation? Alvarez frowned. Only if we get at least one more resident's statement. Otherwise, it's just a personal complaint. We need at least 2 witnesses. That afternoon, I went door to door. A few quietly declined. Others just shook their heads behind partially closed doors. One whispered, "I sympathize with you, but I can't get involved. They'll take my home." They, in this case, wasn't the government. It was Karen and her fake HOA patrol. I returned home feeling like I was fighting alone in a neighborhood under a spell. That evening, Tamara called me, her voice trembling. They came to my house, 3 of them. One handed me a new citation and said I had to sign a statement saying you were the disruptive one if I wanted them to leave. I rushed over immediately. When I arrived, they were still on her porch. Dark blue uniforms, SUV with flashing lights. One even held plastic zip tie cuffs. I walked straight up to them, voice cold as steel. "Put that down. Impersonating law enforcement is a federal offense. I'm an FBI agent. If you don't leave in 10 seconds, I'm calling in the real authorities." The tall man glared at me. "You don't have the authority to order around the HOA force." I smirked. "There is no force here. Just a group of impersonators begging to be arrested." Right then, a police siren wailed in the distance. Alvarez had arrived. He stepped forward, eyes sharp. "I need to see ID in your contract with the HOA." The 3 men froze. One hesitantly pulled out a plastic badge. No photo, no ID number. Alvarez glanced at it, then shook his head. "Invalid. This is fake. If you don't leave immediately, I'll be filing a report and recommending charges for harassment and impersonation of public officials." They backed off, silently. But before leaving, one of them turned to me and muttered, "You have no idea who you're messing with." After they left, Tamara let out a shaky breath. She was nearly in tears. "Thank you. I thought I was about to lose everything." I looked into her worried eyes and said, "They'll come back, but next time, I'll have enough evidence to shut this down for good." I called Alvarez. "Tamara's formal statement will be ready tonight. We'll have 2 witnesses. I'll keep pushing for more." He replied firmly, "Good. I'll start the case file." That night, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. No fake SUVs parked on the street. No flashing lights. No new flyers. Karen didn't show up. Maybe she was reconsidering. Maybe she was planning her next move. I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't the end. It was the calm before the storm. But I also knew I now had the one thing I needed to turn the tide: a legal, documented, and supported counterstrike. With evidence, with witnesses, with real law enforcement on my side. Karen had just hit her first wall, and she'd have to slow down now. A week after the confrontation with the so-called HOA police, I found a small slip of paper in my mailbox. No signature, just a single line. Community meeting, Friday at 7 p.m., Neighborhood Recreation Center. Below that was the familiar address and one italicized sentence: attendance is mandatory for all residents. I sat still for a moment, holding the paper. I could ignore it, pretend I never saw it. But no, this was an opportunity. If Karen planned to bring everyone into one room, then I'd be there too, with evidence, with the truth. I texted Alvarez, "I'm going to the meeting. Something might happen." He replied simply, "I'll monitor. Let me know if anything goes down." I wired a recording device inside my jacket, set my phone to covertly capture video. I was ready. When I walked in, the room was already packed. Residents sat in rows of plastic chairs, murmuring to one another. Some flinched when they saw me. A few glanced my way, then looked down. Karen stood at the front, gray suit, hair tightly pinned. Next to her were two HOA officers in uniform, arms crossed like bodyguards. I quietly took a seat in the last row. Karen picked up the microphone, her voice loud and clear. "Thank you all for coming. Our community has seen a lot of disruption lately. People not following rules, dangerous behavior." She glanced toward me. "That's why we've increased enforcement, to protect the values and safety of every family here." A few people clapped. Others stayed quiet, visibly tense. I raised my hand. "I'd like to speak." Karen paused. Her eye twitched. "I'm sorry, this meeting isn't open for debate." I stepped forward. "I'm a legal resident of this neighborhood. I have the right to speak." The room tightened. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a federal agent with the FBI. I've lived here for nearly 3 months. During that time, I've witnessed a fake system being constructed by the very person standing before you." I pointed at Karen. She created a fictional HOA, recruited unlicensed officers, collected money from residents without any oversight, and intimidated anyone who dared oppose her. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Karen quickly jumped in. "These are baseless accusations. I'm only protecting our community. My team is made up of volunteers." I cut her off. I investigated. The security company behind these volunteers has no official contract. They are operating illegally. I have photos, plates, and confirmation from city police. I pulled out my phone and projected the images. "This flyer asks for $100 to join the HOA force. This is a citation with no seal. And this," I held up a paper, "is the statement from Tamara, a resident who was threatened in her own home." A voice from the crowd: "I was pressured into paying too." Another pulled out a folded paper. "I got this warning. I thought it was legit." Karen began to unravel. "This is all slander. This is an organized smear campaign." That's when he stepped forward, flashing a badge. "City police, we're investigating impersonation of law enforcement and coercion of residents." Karen went pale. One of her HOA officers slipped out the side door, the other froze in place. Alvarez approached, locking eyes with Karen. "You'll need to come with us for questioning. If you refuse, we'll take further action." Karen trembled with rage, but had no way out. She was handcuffed in front of the entire neighborhood. As she was escorted out, the room erupted in whispers, sighs, and hushed astonishment. Tamara came to me, teary-eyed. "You did it." A man I'd never spoken to approached. "I'm sorry I stayed quiet. I was just scared." I nodded. "I understand, but now, no one has to be afraid anymore." That night, I sat at home in silence. No SUV parked outside, no suspicious stares, just a neighborhood, finally what it was supposed to be. Free from fear, free from false authority. That meeting ended like a slow explosion. No shouting, no violence, just the truth, unfolding piece by piece until Karen, once the ruler of the neighborhood, was led away in handcuffs, her eyes vacant, her posture stripped of any remaining power. No more HOA officers patrolling the streets. No more bogus citations slipped under doors. No more mysterious SUVs circling at night. All that remained were barking dogs, half kids riding bikes in driveways, and occasionally, someone knocking on my door just to say thank you. At her initial hearing, Karen faced charges of impersonating law enforcement, disturbing the peace, extorting residents under the guise of an HOA, and most seriously, falsifying legal documents. Her uncle, a high ranking federal official, was also placed under investigation for potential cover ups. A few weeks later, he quietly submitted his resignation. My boss called me into his office. This time, there were no thick case files on the desk, just a nod and a sentence I'll never forget. We owe you an apology and a thank you. My name was fully cleared, my record restored, no more false accusations hanging over my head. But more importantly, the trust returned, from my agency and from within myself. Tamara rebuilt the fence she once feared she wasn't allowed to paint. Raymond, the silent neighbor, now waves at me every morning as I walk my dog. Some of the younger folks even stop by to ask how to tell if an HOA notice is real or fake. I'm no longer that distant FBI guy. Now I'm just another neighbor. The only difference is, I once dismantled a fake empire in the very place that was supposed to be peaceful. And if you ask me, would you do it all again? The answer is yes. Because sometimes, truth doesn't reveal itself until someone has the courage to speak up. There are places where fake power structures can thrive for years, simply because no one dares to challenge them. And there are people like Karen, who will do anything to hold control until they mess with the wrong person. As for me, I'm not looking for fame. I just did what was right. Karen thought she could manipulate a neighborhood, bend the system, and take control of my life. But in the end, truth was stronger than all of it. She lost everything. And I still have my job, my integrity, and neighbors who now understand the power of standing together. You're hearing this story now and maybe wondering, does my neighborhood have a Karen? Maybe it does. And if it does, remember this. Silence is the weapon of the fraud. Don't let fear make you bow your head, because justice only begins when someone stands up.